Hi, I'm Val Hart in San Antonio, Texas, founder of Val Hart & Friends at valhart.com. Welcome to the Real Dr. Doolittle Show, the show for animals and the people who love them. I've been called a real-life Dr. Doolittle many times in my career as an expert animal communicator, behaviorist, pet psychic, and master healer. My mission and passion is to improve the lives of animals the world over by helping humans learn how to speak their language, how to understand their viewpoints, and heal. After all, our love of animals helps us be better humans, and the more balanced and healthy we are, the more balanced and healthy they can be too. Be sure and look for my CDs on iTunes. And to find out more about my work and to receive your free Quick Start Animal Talk course, just go to my website at valhart.com. While you're there for a limited time, you can also apply for a complimentary Happy Animal Assessment session. And if you want to learn how to be your own Dr. Doolittle, check out the world's first complete Animal Communication Made Easy system, available now on my website at valhart.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, this is Val Hart, the real Dr. Doolittle, and today I'm talking with Dr. Richard Pitcairn. He is the guru of modern veterinary homeopathy in the Western Hemisphere. Since 1992, he has trained almost 500 graduate veterinary doctors in the field of homeopathic medicine, and he is the force behind the founding of the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy in America since 1995. If you're seeking a deeper understanding of true healing with animals, then you can't go wrong with Dr. Pitcairn's programs. You can find out more about that by going to drpitcairn.com. Dr. Pitcairn founded the Animal Natural Health Center in 1986 as a clinical and teaching center in Eugene, Oregon. It's dedicated to the understanding and use of homeopathic medicine in the treatment of disease. And he also covers the use of excellent nutrition through home-prepared and raw foods. They also offer a variety of educational opportunities for vets as well as us dog and cat parents. A good place to start is the book which I recommend to all my clients, Natural Health for Dogs and Cats. It's long been recognized as the leading book in its field, and he comes to us with an incredibly long list of very impressive credentials, and he's been a major force for holistic change in veterinary medicine since 1985. In 1995, Dr. Pitcairn co-founded the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy. It's the first professional organization of practicing veterinary homeopaths in the United States. Welcome, Dr. Pitcairn. I'm so glad you can join the show.
I didn't know I was a guru. Do I get to build an ashram now?
You do.
All
yes,
right.
And you're in the West, so we'll...
Well, thank you for the nice introduction.
You are so welcome. Now, you started as a traditional veterinarian when you entered private practice way back in 1965, and you were working with small animals, farm livestock, and zoo animals. So how in the world did you go from there to where you are now? Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. Before I say that, though, I might just mention,
okay.
I don't really use the word traditional for veterinary medicine.
Okay.
Rather, I say conventional because it gives it too much authority. Tradition, something's traditional, it goes back for generations.
Oh, you are right.
The medicine we know goes back about 3 years.
Wow.
It changes constantly. New ideas, other ideas are rejected. So really a better term is just say what we consider to be orthodox or conventional.
Okay.
And there's really no tradition to it that I can see.
I like that you've... yeah, that's good. That's good. I get it.
To answer your question, though, I did graduate from University of California at Davis. That's in California.
Okay.
And I went into practice in Southern California, as you said. And so I did that for about almost 2 years. And I then left practice to go work up at Washington State University, which is in the state of Washington, of course. Okay. And I was on the faculty there in large animal, doing farm calls and what they call large animal reception. Mm. It's kind of like a veterinary practice where you bring your dog and cat in, only they brought horses and cows and pigs and things. Mm-hmm. So I went up there to the university because, to answer your question, I felt like I was not seeing the results I expected with the treatments I was doing. Now I look back at it, I realize that primarily my obstacle was I was trying to deal with chronic disease conditions. that by their nature tend to continue and get worse with time.
Yeah.
But I had come out of school thinking that I would be able to resolve those problems to a great extent, and I wasn't seeing that happen. So I assumed, probably like a lot of people would, that the deficit was with me, so I should go back and get more education. So I went back to the university, as I said, and after I was there for a year on the faculty, I got a chance to enter graduate school. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I worked on a PhD in immunology for 7 years until I finished that program.
Wow.
But I realized as I was going through the program that even though it was fascinating, and I learned quite a bit about how the body works, I still didn't find a way to be more successful in treating these problems.
Wow.
So that's why I began to look other places and other directions for, possible answers. I didn't really know what I was looking for, you understand. I was just kind of reading this and that. And while I was towards the end of my graduate studies, I came across an article in the science library about the importance of nutrition in children in Africa in terms of their immunity and how their immune systems worked. They were working with children that had nutritional deficiencies, these doctors. And I read that and I thought, this is really amazing, because I had never heard before that time in all my training that nutrition had any influence at all on the immune system.
Oh, my God. Wow.
So it seems obvious, to think about it for a moment, but I had never heard of it, and I never thought of it. So this really intrigued me, and I went back to my major professor and said, this is something I wanted to look into, and shall we say that was not really the current interest in immunology? And so
I can hear some backstory on that one. Yeah.
So I eventually, though I stayed there for a while, I worked on the faculty for a couple of years, did some research and taught, but eventually I decided to go back into practice because I didn't think that I would really be able to get any kind of research support to do studies in that direction. So what I did is I went back into practice, and I tried to, I started to read about nutrition on my own as best I could at that time. Finding different books and things and trying to understand the whole topic. And so most of what I read was about nutrition in general. That is, how nutrition affects metabolism in both, primarily in people. That's where most of the studies have been done. Yeah. Somewhat in animals, but most of what I learned was about how, vitamins and minerals and metabolism works in human beings. And I was trying to apply that to animals in my practice. It's kind of funny in a way because here I had this interest in coming out of school with the background I had, and yet I could not find a veterinary practice, that I could work in as an employee.
Wow.
That would let me really emphasize this very much.
Oh, my God.
And one place that worked out the best for me said, well, you can talk about nutrition, but we won't stock any kind of nutritional supplements here. They'll have to go out and buy them on their own. Very interesting, isn't it? That attitude.
Oh, my God, yeah.
So so that's how I started, and I began to try to suggest to people with these animals that had these chronic disease problems. And, typically what I mean by that, for people to understand, would be like hip dysplasia and arthritis and allergies and hyperthyroidism in cats and those kind of problems, that are very difficult to see improvement with.
Yeah.
So I was using nutrition to help the animals that had those kind of problems.
Okay.
And so I saw results. I saw improvements with them, and I was excited about that. And that encouraged me to do more reading and study. And, I'm just sort of summarizing this. You understand this was over a period of quite a few years.
Oh, yeah, just a few.
So I'm just so it sounds like it all just happened all at once, but it didn't really. It was a very gradual thing.
Yeah.
But so what I was going to say is that at some point, it came up in my mind as to, well, why is nutrition making such a difference for these animals when they're already on what I was told was a good food, commercial food. And so that was a puzzle to me because there really isn't, I don't know about now, but at least when I went to school, there was really no education in nutrition of dogs and cats and other animals like that. There was about horses and cattle, but not about small animals. So I didn't really know anything about it, and I was just told the commercial foods are the best you could feed them. In fact, most veterinarians probably say that. If you go in and talk to them about it, they'll say just don't feed table scraps, feed a commercial food.
Yes.
Well, that's what we're told in school, and that's the whole extent of our training.
That's it? That's all you're taught?
Yeah, it was about half an hour discussion of it in vet school. I'm not exaggerating. That's all there was.
That's insane.
So, it is amazing, isn't it?
It is. It's amazing.
And I hope it's better now, but I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I know a lot of veterinary, their practices, they depend on the income from selling these foods, Well,
there's that, sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that. So there's the profit margin there. And, I know it's hard. But then if they're not taught to look deeper into the topic and they just buy the marketing, or the promotion from the commercial pet food industry, then they don't look at it any closer. Thank God you did.
I think to be fair to the veterinarians that we're talking about that have this orientation, is they don't really know any better. They don't have the training, and they're told by what authorities. Well, not all authorities, but basically, most veterinarians would hear from as you say, the pet food companies and from others that these foods are really good products and well formulated. So they don't know. They think that's really true, and they are. They're not. It's not like they know better and they're trying to make money. It's not that. It's not like that. Not that base. But at the same time, they usually don't have a whole lot of interest in nutrition. Many veterinarians.
Yeah.
So it kind of leads to just basically going along with the flow, so to speak.
Well, and it makes sense to me because if they actually buy that and they think they're feeding a good product, then they wouldn't have the interest in looking at it more closely. Right, or really examining it or researching it for themselves. They have other things to look at, right? They have other concerns and other areas that they're trying to focus on. So that makes sense. Yes,
and medicine is very complex, as you say. There's an awful lot to know, and I found, just as a digression, the information flow coming to veterinarians and to doctors is just incredible. Most people don't realize how much is coming at them.
Yeah.
Veterinarians are expected to keep up with the new findings, so they're constantly getting journals and taking continuing education. Mm-hmm. But then what I see happens is that the, I would say, psychological pressure to keep up with the literature prevents them from having time to look at anything new.
Yes.
And the information they're learning, I don't feel, is particularly helpful to them in terms of curing these chronic problems, you see, which is what we're talking about. So it's interesting, it keeps them very busy, and it keeps them from looking at anything outside that field, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And for me, what was different was that I, because of the way I went from practice into graduate school and then back, I didn't really feel that I needed to keep up with the literature that much. I felt like I'd already done it, so to speak. I'd already investigated it pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for something outside the literature, if it makes sense to you.
Yes.
And so I didn't feel that pressure. I felt freer to look elsewhere. So maybe that was the difference.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So I began to go back to this question of, what made such a difference in these animals that they seemed to be improving more than I had seen before. Then I had to ask, well, what is it about the commercial foods? Why don't they provide that? And so I began then to try to understand more about. I didn't have any idea more than anybody else about, what's really in commercial pet foods and how they're made and so on.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure your listeners have heard a lot of this stuff about, the quality isn't so good, and they use byproducts and also foods that are not suitable for human consumption, of course. Right. That's why they're put into pet food. That's why they're so cheap.
Yeah.
So that includes. Am I repeating things people have already heard? I
No,
can go into a little bit.
I think we all need to hear it as often as we can. It's amazing to me how many people haven't got the message yet. They haven't actually looked at it. Like you said, they're busy. They've got whatever. They bought the research. They bought the promotion, and they bought the ad, and it's convenient, and they didn't look. They didn't do their due diligence. So you're welcome to talk about it all you want.
Well, I'll just say then, somewhat briefly, that what I found is that, of course, I'm generalizing because not all foods are the same. Some are better quality than others to some degree. But first of all, I would say that at least when I was learning about it, I found that basically the pet food industry uses the remnants of what can't be used for human beings. Mm-hmm. So there is, like for example, if you might look at a can of food and it might say that the meat is it FDA inspected? I guess FDA inspected. Mm-hmm. No, not FDA. What is it? Anyway, you know what I mean. The meat inspectors.
Yeah.
And so people might be reassured by that. Oh, this has been inspected. But what they don't realize is the inspector that's looking at an animal carcass coming through the line, if it sees some area of disease like the liver or maybe a tumor or something, mm-hmm. that part's cut off and put into pet food.
Oh, wow.
That's what the inspection means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting, you know, there's a lot of foods that go, like, for instance, foods that in the market that go past their expiration date are sent to pet food factories. Mm. Roadkill is. Mm-hmm. Animals that have had antibiotics given to them, like, for instance, a lot of people may not know this, but there are rules about, for example, if a cow that's being used to produce milk gets an infection or something and has to have antibiotics, then there are rules about you can't use that milk because then it carries the antibiotics into the milk, of course, and that's, affect people and so on.
Yeah.
But you can use it in pet food, and also the cow, then, if it's sent to slaughter because it didn't get well, can't be used for human food, but it can be used for pet food.
Right. So
all the rules, when you start looking at them, show that to a great extent, the pet food industry uses that stuff that we think isn't good for us.
Yeah.
For humans to eat.
Yeah.
And so that really opened my eyes when I realized that, oh my gosh, the quality isn't that good, number one. Some of the food is stale, some of it's rancid, some of it's toxic mm-hmm. for various reasons. And so I began to realize that the commercial foods really weren't providing the very highest quality. Okay. So the result of that, I should say, is that my wife and I put together some recipes, like, well, what's the alternative? And basically the only alternative I could think of was, well, you fix the food yourself instead of buying it.
Yeah.
But that was back quite a long time ago, back in the 80s. And now there's a lot more foods available to people that are better quality, Mm-hmm. But at that time, there weren't those foods. There weren't those choices, or very few choices. Mm-hmm. So what we did is we put together recipes, and then we started, at that time in the 80s, my wife and I were writing a monthly column for Prevention magazine, if you know that. If you've seen that magazine.
Prevention magazine, yes, well-known. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, it was quite different in those days. It was much more alternative compared to now. But anyway, we were writing a column called Your Healthy Pet, and we would write about these things, about using nutrition and using natural products and herbs and things. So that's when all of this stuff developed that we started using, and then, they asked us to do a book.
Mm. Oh,
and
okay.
So, Rodale did, the publisher. Mm-hmm. And so we thought that they actually thought that we ought to just put together some of our articles, and I thought about it, and Susan and I discussed it as to what do we want to do this project at all, and decided that if we're going to write something like that, we should just do an entire new book rather than just recycling the articles. And that's mm-hmm. how our first mm-hmm. edition came about in '82. Wow. And that incorporated a lot of these recipes that we come up with that I've been using in practice. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And people were seeing wonderful results with the recipes. It was really quite heartwarming because, I got busy enough in my practice that I couldn't always take people. We had a waiting list.
Yeah. And
I would give them the recipes to use for a while until we could see them. And it wasn't that unusual. They would say, when we would contact them in a few months, they'd say, well, they're fine now. Just using the recipes you gave me was enough for them to get healthy.
Yeah, we finally gave them what they needed, and now they're healthy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was quite impressive to us at that time to see that.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it all began. And then, of course, that being said, is kind of a background about understanding the importance of nutrition. then it doesn't take too long to realize that nutrition isn't a complete answer, because there are animals that don't get well with improved nutrition, or there are animals that are too seriously ill for them to. In other words, they're like they have parvovirus or something, some kind of infection. And there's also animals that just won't eat.
Yeah.
That's a common problem in cats.
Yeah.
So sometimes nutrition can't really solve the problem, so I was continuing to look for other answers, and I was studying many other therapies that I was coming across and reading, like polarity therapy and color therapy and Chinese medicine, acupuncture and herbal medicine and so on. And I, at some point, finally came across a little book on homeopathy. Didn't even know how to pronounce the word, and didn't know anything about it really. But it was intriguing to me, some of the ideas, and so that's got me started. And I began to read a little bit and ordered a few homeopathic remedies and saw them working, and so that intrigued me more. And so eventually I found myself completely committed to that as my method.
Wow.
It really, surprisingly, the philosophy of homeopathy surprisingly fits in very well with what I learned in graduate school in immunology.
Really?
And so I thought, this is just wonderful. It's like I can actually carry this forward and use this method, and it makes sense to me. So that's how I got started on that. And finally, that became my major focus, even more than nutrition. So for the last 32 years, that's all I've done is homeopathic medicine.
Wow.
No other therapies, other than nutrition.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I know people they get confused about the different forms of medicine. So you want to talk about that?
It is. Yeah. It is confusing, I think, to people. I hear this because I'm on some forums, public forums where I try to help people with answers as much as I have time. I get this question frequently about reflecting confusion about medicine, and I also would say that since, realize, I don't know if I said, but I graduated in 1965. That was right before television was invented, That was... So we're talking about, 40-some years ago. So medicine, I've seen medicine in general, veterinary medicine, I should say, well, probably medicine in general, human medicine as well, has really changed from those times. And I will give you an example of that. When I went through veterinary school, we had a course, and one of our semester courses was called ethics.
Okay.
That is in the sense of, I don't know if they teach ethics anymore. That'd be an interesting question.
Wow.
But ethics was, really what's proper, what's the right thing to do versus not the right thing to do, and so on. And one of the things that impressed me at that time was because of our understanding of how the body works and how diseases operate and so on, is that they said if there ever is any kind of an infection in an animal, you must never, never, never use any kind of a steroid, like prednisone or prednisolone. You know what I mean by those steroids? They said because what those steroids do is they suppress the immune system and prevent the animal from recovering. And even if it's a bacterial infection, the antibiotic by itself is not sufficient to recover. You have to have a functional immune system. It's like those, those bubble boys or bubble girls you hear every now and then where they have to live inside of an enclosed plastic sphere. Yeah. Well, that's because even with antibiotics, they can't stay healthy because their immune systems aren't working. Yeah. So that I carried that with me. They said, these are the words they told us. They said, if you use a steroid when an animal has any kind of infection, it is considered malpractice. Wow. That was the word they used. Well, using steroids is common now. Yeah. Most veterinarians use it for almost anything, any kind of infection. Oh, my God. See how much has changed in that period of time. Well, what's changed is not the basic truth, which you just expressed so eloquently. What changed is what the vets are actually doing. So they don't consider it malpractice anymore. They haven't actually been taught that. And yet our animals are suffering the consequence with all these exponentially increased autoimmune diseases and disorders and chronic disease, like you got you started. I think it's even gone so far as to say it's considered now the standard of practice. In other
Wow.
words, if I was a conventional veterinarian and I was treating an animal and I didn't use a steroid, it's possible I could be reported to the board and disciplined for not doing standard of practice, including steroid use.
That's outrageous.
It is, isn't it?
Yes.
So let's talk about that for a moment for people to better understand the significance of this.
Okay.
And I might ask you, just to see as a foundation where to go from,
Mm-hmm.
what do you understand to be the significance of symptoms if your animal's sick?
What
they
do
have symptoms. They're sick, and they show symptoms. You know what I mean by symptoms?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of course.
So how do you understand the symptoms? What are they? What's the meaning of them?
To me, they're the tip of the iceberg of something going on deep inside the body.
Mm-hmm.
A reaction of some kind, an overwhelm or an imbalance of some kind, or like we were talking earlier, a nutritional deficiency, so they don't have what they needed to repel the invader, like the pathogen, the virus, bacteria, fungus, parasite, whatever it is, or
Mm-hmm.
they're toxic. They've become toxic, and their systems are degenerating or breaking down. That's what I would consider it to be.
Okay, well, that's good, and let me add to that, make a little different angle on it.
Good.
How about if we consider, if we say, for instance, that we're all familiar maybe with getting some kind of a little injury, like a cut or something on your arm, say.
Okay.
I just did this the other day.
Oh.
Where I live here in Arizona, we've got cactus, and I backed into one yesterday.
Shoot.
Oh,
God. Okay.
So let's say you have a little cut in your arm. We know that then what happens before it heals is it goes through a period of inflammation. It gets red and a little bit swollen and painful, and then it scabs over if it doesn't, get infected and so on. It has to go through a healing process.
Yes.
So we can say the symptoms that are present as a result of that cut are the actual mechanism of healing the body's going through.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's the way it heals it. So in other words, there's no way to go from cut to healed without going through those steps.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's necessary. That's the way the body repairs the tissue that's been damaged. It brings in new blood cells and white blood cells and other factors and nutrients and so on to create new tissue there.
Okay.
And there are also white blood cells that come in that prevent infection from starting and so on.
Okay.
Well, the same thing applies with any kind of illness. We use the word disease, but it's interesting that the word disease is related to, let's say I'm sitting at my ease talking to you. I'm sitting in a comfortable recliner chair at my ease,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Disease means that you're not comfortable.
Okay.
But disease in medicine has come to mean something external to us, something that has to be repelled or gotten rid of, instead of being part of our mechanism. So if we say instead of disease, we say that the body, as you were mentioning earlier, is out of balance. And it is a result of being out of balance for some reason. It's trying to come back to normal and repair itself as necessary.
Yes.
And when it does that, it produces symptoms of illness.
Okay.
So like, for example, the animal that gets sick, say with parvovirus, and it's vomiting or diarrhea,
mm-hmm.
those symptoms that it's producing are attempts by its body to get rid of the virus and recover.
Yes.
It might develop a fever,
mm-hmm.
which gives the fever gives the body an advantage over the microorganism because the fever makes everything move faster and then allows the body to respond more quickly than it would have otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So all of the symptoms that are present are actually expressions of the body's healing mechanism.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's good. Well said.
And yet, our system of medicine is based on suppressing those symptoms.
Yes, everything we do is to make them go away.
Make them go away
disappear.
somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can't see them or don't notice them anymore.
So that's in a nutshell describing the conventional system of medicine, the one that's called allopathic.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that, but basically the philosophy, the idea behind it, is that the symptoms are a disease to be gotten rid of, and if you can't get rid of it, then you at least prevent them from expressing themselves. So there are a lot of drugs that are used, anti-inflammatory drugs, steroids and other things, to keep the body from expressing those symptoms.
Yeah.
But the symptoms are the way the body heals itself.
Wow.
So what you're doing is preventing the healing process. And in the process, or in the path of doing that, then the immune system gets gradually weaker because it's constantly being suppressed. It's like anything, like, for instance, if the comparison between, say, somebody going for daily walks and exercising on a regular basis versus the couch potato that never moves from the couch.
Yeah.
After a while, your muscles get soft and weak.
Yeah.
In the same way, if the immune system is constantly suppressed, then it becomes weak also. And therefore, it can't do its job of preventing infection or preventing parasites or preventing cancer and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, total sense. It's a big wake-up call. So the symptoms are actually the way the body heals itself, and when we suppress them, it weakens the body and interrupts the body's ability to heal itself. It may hide the symptoms by pushing them deeper into the body, but that only lasts for a little bit of time before we see other things crop up, because the fundamental body, the fundamental being, is now seriously compromised. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, that's right. And I would say as well, to follow up on that, that the usual, we're talking about, so we're trying to talk about different forms of medicine. We have to be clear, first of all, I think, what I'm addressing is understand the one that our culture is most aligned with, which is the allopathic system.
Yes.
And the allopathic system is based on the idea of using treatments that counter the symptoms expression. That's why it's called allopathic. It's using medicines that somehow block that. So for an example would be if your cat was hyperthyroid, most likely the veterinarian would give you a drug that stops the thyroid from working. It blocks it.
Right.
If your animal has skin allergies, put it on prednisone or some other similar drug that prevents the immune system from expressing the symptoms on the skin. So people have to understand. I mean, if they're interested in this topic that we're discussing, they have to understand that approach is not one that cures disease or restores health. That what it does is it suppresses symptoms and masks the disease expression, as you said a moment ago.
Yeah.
It hides it. But the disease is still there, and it continues. So let me go a little bit further with that, if I'm not getting too complicated here.
That's perfect. I love it.
When the disease is masked that way, and it's not gone, it can't show itself anymore. There are some things we know now. When I say we, I mean those of us that work in homeopathy, because it's a different approach, a different philosophy. What we understand happens is that the disease continues, number one, and secondly, that it develops or progresses in a chronological sense faster than it would have otherwise.
Wow.
In other words, if left alone, there would be discomfort. But when it's suppressed, it develops faster.
Wow.
A third thing is that it tends to move then to a different part of the body.
Okay.
So the focus might be on the skin. Let's say that the dog that has allergies is treated with steroids, and that seems to control it for a year or two, but then comes in with some other problem with the pancreas or heart or something. It's the same disease, but now it's manifesting in a different place.
Wow, that's scary.
So the interesting thing about this, I think, is that culturally speaking, is that we don't have time to go into the history of this, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
We have committed ourselves as a culture to this system of medicine, even though it's not the only one that's out there.
Right.
And other countries in the world, they haven't committed them. Many of them haven't committed themselves so strongly. They offer other alternatives, supported by insurance and by health system and so on. And one of those is homeopathic medicine, which is the one I studied. So the difference, now that we've maybe, hopefully made that somewhat clear of what the allopathic system is, the homeopathic system understands symptoms differently. As I said, they are the mechanism in which the body's trying to heal itself. So what we do is we, based on because we don't have time to go in the history of how all this developed, but the idea in homeopathy, the discovery was that if you use a substance, it could be a drug or an herb or some other material, if you can use something that in itself will produce very similar symptoms, in other words, a very similar disturbance in the body as the natural disease is presenting itself, that actually stimulates the immune system to act more strongly.
Okay.
And so what we do is we match what's called a similar remedy. We use very small quantities of substances that match the symptoms of the patient, and we use it in such a way that it stimulates the symptoms the patient's showing to actually become stronger, more intense, and resolve the problem.
Okay, that makes sense.
Interesting, huh? How opposite it is?
Yes, it's counterintuitive.
Counterintuitive in the sense, in a way, but if you think about it for a moment, if you stimulate, let me start over.
Okay.
Think of it like this. We can't go into this because it'd be a digression. But let's say the one question would be, well, why doesn't when there's chronic disease, why doesn't the animal or the person, why don't they respond more adequately to the problem? See, that's an interesting question itself. So we can't go there because it would be off in another direction. But let's assume that that's the case, that there's a potential there. There's a potential for it to work better than it is. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
And that's what we're stimulating with the homeopathic remedies. We're activating that potential for the system to work better. So here's a little analogy I give sometimes.
Okay.
Let's say, we'll just make this up because I don't know your situation personally, but let's assume that you have a husband, and the husband's duty that you've agreed upon more or less is that he takes the trash out every week, right? And a certain day he's supposed to take the trash out to be picked up.
Yep.
So it's time. It's that evening for the trash to go out, and he hasn't taken it out. He's sitting there watching the television, watching some sports thing, drinking beer. So you come in and you say, honey, you're supposed to take the trash out. He says, and he continues watching the tube, right? So you come back another time. You say, you got to take the trash out before you go to bed. And he continues watching it. So finally, you come in, and you happen to have a magazine in your hands. You roll it up, and you hit him over the top of the head with it and say, take the trash out.
Yeah.
He said, okay, I'll do it. He gets up and takes the trash out. So that's a little bit of maybe an analogy. It's like the system isn't working as well as it should. We give the homeopathic remedy, which creates a similar kind of disturbance, and wakes it up and says, hey, take the trash out.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So that is brilliant. I get it. So okay, go ahead.
So here's the thing that follows from that. Where there's a lot of confusion. We started with this discussion with this thing about the question about confusion. And part of the confusion is that some people, some practitioners of veterinary medicine, become interested because of the lack of complete results with the conventional system they were trained in, the allopathic. Yeah. They start picking up other systems of treatment. And they then develop what we call, there's a couple of words that can be used. Eclectic practice is a common one. Another is integrative medicine.
Yes.
Or complementary.
Yes.
And what that means is they're combining them all together.
Yeah.
But you see, if you combine the allopathic system, say with homeopathy, when they're working opposite directions, you don't benefit the patient at all. If you were using a drug to suppress the immune system while you're using a remedy to stimulate it, what's going to happen?
Yeah, counter each other out or create problems.
So most practitioners are still thinking the same way that they thought when they did allopathic medicine. Okay. But now they're trying to add in other systems that are actually working in a completely different way.
Okay.
So most of these practices really are just trying to put together some things that don't fit together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And oftentimes where the confusion in the marketplace arises is that you go to one practitioner that combines these three things together, and then you go to another one that combines these four things together, and so on. And there's no consistency anywhere.
Right.
Have you run into that yourself?
Yes, I have. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, so I think what it is that there is, it's always a challenge to us, to our minds, but we learn something, and then we find it very difficult to let it go once we've learned it.
Yeah.
And so there's a tendency more to just add to what we've already learned to sort of make it work.
Right.
But a lot of the confusion and mishmash that's out there right now is because people are not necessarily changing their perspective on health.
Okay.
And they're still trying to do the suppression of symptoms in some way.
Yeah.
But now they're using other methods to do it with. Same thing happens in homeopathy. You'll find practitioners that are using combination homeopathic remedy formulas or injecting them in the body and all sorts of things that are just seem really counter to what the principles are in homeopathic medicine.
Okay.
And it's confusing to the consumer because they don't know any better. They haven't studied it.
Right. So what can we do? What should we do?
Well, unfortunately, it comes down to the consumer, the pet owner, guardian, whatever, has to take a certain amount of responsibility to understand what we're talking about here. I mean, if they want to really, if they're interested in this, many people aren't really interested. They're satisfied that the symptoms just go away for a while.
Exactly.
Right? They don't. That's fine. Let's not make it too complicated.
Yeah. They only get upset when their animal's dying or that they're costing them, a lot because now they're very ill and, it's gone on too long. So, yeah.
Exactly. So many people aren't going to be interested in this, but there are some that are going to question this more deeply and say, I don't really think this system is serving me, this system of medicine that the veterinary has been giving me. I want to find something else. Well, what we're talking about is necessary to understand what something else is.
Yeah.
You really need to turn away from the suppressive therapies if your animal is going to have its health restored.
Right.
And we do that through nutrition, and we do that through homeopathy and through some other systems that are out there that are not trying to suppress symptoms in the animal. That's the major divide that one has to understand. The major difference there. And, in other words, you can take the medicines that are available to you. On one side, you can say they're basically suppressive therapies, and on the other side, they work in some other way, in some more supportive way of the body. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, and so I want to talk about your book for just a moment. So your book, Dr. Pitcairn's Complete Guide to Natural Health for Dogs and Cats. I know you wrote the first edition in 1982, and you're now on your third edition that came out in 2005.
Yes.
One of the things I love about your book that I have just found so much value in is the resources section where you talk about common ailments. I think it's the last half of the book usually, the quick reference section.
Quick reference, yeah.
Yeah, you talk about, homeopathy and how to use holistic and alternative therapies and all the other incredibly important things. You got all the recipes in here, great tips, etc. But the quick reference is so awesome. Thank you so much for creating this. You talk about everything from abscesses all the way to vaccinations, which is a whole other topic in itself, to cancer, to eye problems, to hips, to kidneys, to livers, to you name it. You go through everything in here. And, in fact, that's actually how I found out about you. The first book I found was in the late 80s, I believe it was, and I had a new kitten that I was a stray, probably about 6 weeks old. I brought her home, and she was very, very ill. She had a explosive diarrhea. I don't know that we ever got it all, cleaned up. It was awful. And then she also got a really bad case of ear mites. And someone recommended your book, or I came across it. I don't even know how I found it, but I did, and I followed your directions on dealing with ear mites and, and rebalancing her. And by that time, my older cat also had these issues. She had chronic ear infections, and we had been to the vet. We had done the allopathic approach. The eardrops, all that stuff was not working. It was ongoing for months, miserable. And when I tried your approach, literally within a week, it was over. It was just done. They were fine. So that was when I first found out about you. So thank you so much for putting this in here. This is a masterful. Yeah, it was amazing. It was fabulous.
I'm going to leave that part in.
Yeah. Yeah, be sure and leave that part. But yeah, so I want to thank you for that and draw people's attention to that aspect of your book, as it really is quite wonderful.
Good.
Excellent.
Glad to hear it.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent to have on the shelf and to refer to. So thanks. Well, okay, so just wanted to mention that while we're talking about it. Is there anything else you want us to know about the book? I know people can get their copy at your website or on Amazon.com or pretty much anywhere where they have books. And for people who are listening, I just want to remind you about your website. It's drpitcairn.com, drpitcairn.com. Okay, so let's continue. So let's talk about nutrition.
Okay.
How about nutrition? We touched on it briefly a little bit ago, but there's so much confusion about proper nutrition. There's a lot of emphasis on avoiding grains right now and feeding primarily meat and bones. What's your viewpoint on that?
Well, I think it's based on a misunderstanding. I hear the strangest things. You're talking about the book, and the other day I was perusing. It's kind of a strange thing to do, I know, but I was on Amazon looking at the reader comments,
Oh, that's good. That's good.
And, it is interesting to see because, like, you just gave a little story there, and other people do, too, about how the advice has helped them. But every now and then in the reader's comments, there'll be somebody say, oh, this book is terrible. It advises using grains in the recipes, and which are toxic to animals. I would never use any of this. And I'm thinking, where are they coming from? It's the oddest thing that this whole idea has arisen because, first of all, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever in nutritional research that grains are toxic to dogs or cats. It's like, where did it, you just, the actual research has been done, and for example, I'll get more to this topic in a moment, but there's actual research that's been done with grains, starches, and so on, fed to dogs and cats. I mean this, I don't mean like woo-woo research. I mean research done by scientific advisory groups, where they've studied dogs and cats eating high grain diets or starch, large amounts of starch, or even kittens and puppies growing with it, have shown that they digest it with no problem whatsoever, close to 100% of it. Wow. And so, the facts run quite counter to what people say about it, that it's not digestible, for example, and so on.
Interesting.
So where does this idea come from? And also, as you talked about, as we have been talking about, using the recipes we came up with that are in our book, also they use grains as part of the recipe. And so for whatever long it's been now, I hate to think how long that's been, since the first edition came out in 82. What, is it almost 30 years?
Almost. Isn't that amazing?
Almost. So those recipes have been used all the time with wonderful results. So, it obviously doesn't fit the facts. Nonetheless, there is this idea that's very strong. So what's going on? I think that the misunderstanding is that people began to realize that the commercial foods that they thought contained grains were not so healthy for the animals. Back to what we talked about earlier. About byproducts. The thing that they didn't understand was that the commercial foods were not using grains. They were using byproducts of grains. They were using parts of it that were not used. Sure. They don't use the whole grain. If you look on the label, it'll talk about different sources, but they're not using the whole. Well, some foods do now, but I mean, that was the problem. They were only using byproducts, and not even particularly good quality ones. They could be, have spoilage and rancid and so on.
Right.
So they misunderstood that the animals were getting poor quality byproducts, and translated that to grains as a type of food. In other words, carbohydrates.
Right.
And there's just no evidence whatsoever that carbohydrates are not a good food for animals.
Okay.
So that's one thing.
Okay.
So what has happened then as a result of the idea that's circulated around and has become very common, sort of faddish, that grains should not be fed to dogs and cats.
Okay.
What they're doing now is feeding large amounts of meat and bones.
Right.
There is that whole diet program of feeding just mostly raw meat and bones.
Right.
So there's a couple of problems with that people are not realizing.
Okay.
First of all, it's like the lifestyle is quite different. It's like the couch potato versus the athlete. If the person is very active, then they can use a food like that that's high in protein, and because protein, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's basically three food groups. There's proteins, fat, and carbohydrates.
Okay.
Three groups.
Right.
Proteins are necessary, but proteins are used primarily for making new tissue, new enzymes, and those kind of things. They're necessary for the structure of the body, but they are not a good energy source.
Okay.
In fact, they're a very inefficient energy source, and they tend to have toxic residue when they're metabolized. In other words, if they have to be used for energy, if proteins have to be used for energy, they have to be converted to sugar in the blood. And in the process of doing that, it produces urea, which is toxic.
Okay.
Now, in nature, animals like wolves, say, which would be closest to a dog, or dog-like animals, they eat large amounts of meat, but they also don't eat very frequently, and they do a tremendous amount of exercise.
True.
They might travel 100 miles between feedings.
Right.
They spend, a day or two hunting before they eat, as compared to the dog that gets his food, goes from the couch to the kitchen floor, right?
Yeah.
So many of the animals that are kept as pets are not having a balance in their lifestyle between the kind of high protein diets they're getting and the lack of exercise, and therefore not having adequate stimulation of the digestive tracts.
Right. Okay.
In other words, when the animals in wild are very active in movement, it moves everything along, their digestion is faster, their peristalsis in the intestines is quicker.
Right.
It doesn't stay in the system as long. The sluggish animal in a house is everything is moving slower. There's more absorption of toxins. I don't know.
Right.
Is that making sense?
Right. Yes, it does.
So that's one thing. The other thing is the problem of pollution, environmental pollution.
Okay.
The food or the thing that has the most accumulated chemicals in it is meat.
Okay.
Top of the food chain.
Okay.
They have done studies, for example, I don't know very many, if any, studies in animals like this, so I have to talk about people.
Okay.
They've done studies in people where they've looked at families, children, adults, and grandparents, for example, and analyzed their tissues.
Okay.
And they say today that people have between 1 and 200 chemicals that have taken resident in their body. We're talking about chemicals that are not foods, like PCBs, DDT, dioxin, antibiotics, antidepressants. Okay. There's an unbelievable amount, and nobody knows what they do. No one has ever really studied what the effect is on health of this 100-plus chemicals in the tissues.
Wow.
There are no studies like that. They'll look at a few of them, but it's too complicated, to look at 100.
Yes.
They'll look at one at a time, say, or I did see a study more recently where they looked at the top 6, the ones that were on the highest level, and they found that people that had the highest levels of the top 6 had a 32 times greater incidence of diabetes, for example. So there are some studies like that, but nobody really knows. There's no research or literature out there to say, what do these chemicals do to the body?
Yeah.
Most of which are toxic. Some of them are thought to cause cancer, for example.
Right. Well, and look at the exponential increase in cancer and diabetes.
Exactly.
All that.
So here you have people that are going out and buying primarily meat and bones to feed to their dogs and cats, thinking they're making them healthy, filling up their bodies with pollutants.
Yeah.
At the top of the food chain.
Whew.
Bones in U.S. animals are high in heavy metals, lead, mercury, cadmium, and those kind of things.
Okay.
So, it's like they're feeding them a kind of diet that's going to result in the most accumulation of those pollutant chemicals in the foods that are possible. So it's the only diet that could do that. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
It's a diet designed to maximize the accumulation of chemicals in the body.
Goodness gracious.
That's one of the reasons that in our recipes we encourage the use of grains in some of the recipes, because you can buy organic grains.
Okay.
And it's very difficult to buy organic meat.
It's expensive and not as easy to find, that's for sure.
Not easy to find, oftentimes not fresh. And as you say, it's very expensive. In fact, a lot of people can't even afford to make food at home for their animals if they have very many of them, because they say you can't afford it.
Yeah.
So it's a real problem in that people are inadvertently causing the buildup of toxins in their animals' tissues.
Yeah.
And then if the animals get sick, they go to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian has no idea what these things will. Well, first of all, isn't even thinking that way. I did a survey of. There's almost 200 veterinarians on a forum that I have, veterinary, for veterinarians to study with me in homeopathy.
Yeah.
I put that question out. I said, what if, an animal came into you, say, that was poisoned by lead? Would you recognize it?
Yeah.
Almost everybody said no. Wouldn't even be thinking of it.
Mm.
So here are all these pollutants that are building up in the tissues. We don't know what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And your veterinarian is not going to be thinking of that at all as a factor.
Yeah, yeah.
So we don't even know what we're dealing with.
No.
We don't even know what the diseases look like that they cause. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So the only real logical thing to do, unfortunately, in the world we live in, is try to minimize the accumulation of these pollutants. And one of the things to do is to try to feed adequate protein, but not any more than you have to.
Okay.
And that's why we've, used, as I say, the recipes we've come up with include grain in them to do that.
Okay.
And also we use bone meal or some other calcium supplement. And the bone meals that are available are ones that come from outside this country.
Okay.
If you take a bone meal that's made from livestock from the U.S., it can't be used for human consumption because of contamination.
Good Lord. Mm.
When you go to a health food store and you buy bone meal, if you were for yourself, you wanted to buy it, you decided you needed calcium or whatever. Some people take bone meal supplement.
Okay.
If you were to go buy it for yourself, it's not going to come from U.S. animals.
Yeah.
It's going to come from places outside the U.S., from Africa and other countries where they just didn't have the problem of contamination we do. Yeah. And yet here are people feeding all these bones and non-organic meat to their animals. You see the problem?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's unfortunate, isn't it?
Oh, it's horrifying. It's not.
Well, it's even more, that we should have to deal with this. I mean, how in the world did we get our environment so polluted like this? Yeah. That we as consumers have to think about what foods we buy. I mean, that's outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
It is.
Oh boy. Oh man.
So anyway, what I recommend
good.
to my client, what I told my clients to do was to feed highest quality foods they could find, as much as they could to get organic foods, and then to minimize the amount of meat that they were feeding, to the animals, give enough to supply their needs, but certainly not give an excess, more than they require for their lifestyle, because there's no advantage to it for the reasons we just discussed.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Another burden to consider, huh?
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's have a happy story now. Do you know any happy stories?
Well, I certainly see a lot of animals that their health is improving as people,
Good.
use these methods we're talking. Well, we didn't talk too much about the methods, but if they stop suppressing symptoms and they do things to encourage health with proper nutrition and treatments that are not going to prevent them from getting well, then the happy part of it is that there's tremendous potential there. I don't think people realize how easy it is in a way for their animals to get healthy again.
Well, that's encouraging. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like we get a sense of hopelessness or incurability about them, but that's only because of the system of medicine that we're applying to it. If you turn to some other methods that are more supportive, they can recover. They can get well. It's really much more hopeful than people think it is.
Well, that makes sense. The allopathic medicine and feeding the commercial foods that we were taught not to question, that just to buy it and feed it. It brings us to a hopeless place because what was it that Einstein said? You do the definition of crazy is to do more of the same and expect a different result. So we're doing the same, paraphrase of course, but so we do get hopeless. We do more of the same, hoping for a different result, and there's no different result. It just keeps going that same direction. So if we shift horses, right, if we get in a different boat and commit ourselves to good nutrition and to look at using things like homeopathy, some of the other healing therapies, as you discussed, then we actually do, like you said, it is easy to get well again. That is very hopeful.
It is, and I think that what on a larger scale, what we need to do as the consumers of medical systems is we have to ask for that. If people that are listening to this would go to the veterinarian and say, we've already done this treatment that you're wanting to do again, and it hasn't worked. What other alternatives can you offer me? Just that question alone, wouldn't you think make a difference? Because then they start to think, the veterinarian will think, my clients want something I'm not providing. Yes,
that's correct.
Because when I hear the other side of it, as a person that is training veterinarians to do this work, because I have this course for veterinarians at training in homeopathy, and I hear when we talk about it, I'll say, like for example, in a meeting, we might say, well, how is your practice going? Tell us about your experience and so on. Very often I hear them say, my clients aren't interested in this. They don't want that.
Wow.
They want a quick fix.
Band-Aid.
And so they find themselves not being able to really grow and develop these other methods of treatment because the clients they have are not supportive of them. They want, if they don't give the clients what they want, they go to another veterinarian and get the steroid or whatever.
Right, just give me a pill to make it go away.
Exactly. So it really comes down to, really, it isn't just, it just isn't the responsibility of the veterinary profession.
No, that's true.
It's really also the public sector that has to realize that they have to be willing to consider and ask for something different than what they're getting.
Thank you. So it's the fur kid's parent who's responsible for asking for something different, that supports our vets in getting, in looking to expand their practice, to learn more, to offer different alternative more supportive methods other than the quick fix, that poison pill.
Yes, and then at the same time, to communicate that there's interest there and support. I mean, it's like, for example, another thing is they'll say, "Oh, it's too expensive." I don't want to work with that veterinarian because they charge too much. But what they don't realize is that the conventional treatment is often, there are many charges that accumulate in the background, and they end up spending just as much or more, So it's like they have to be willing to open their eyes to this and say, and realize that if their animal gets well, the costs diminish.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes, exactly. The other way of suppressing disease, right, creates all these other problems, which ensures that you're going to be going back to the vet a lot, and
That's
more
right.
so the longer your animal lives, however long that is. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we have to have a longer-term viewpoint.
Yes. And as a culture, we need to, because now we're going through all these questions in a larger sphere, about health reform and what the insurance companies will cover and Medicare and so on. And still, it's pretty much aligned with the allopathic system and not offering very many alternatives. Right. Like if you have health insurance and you want to go, you've already, just what we've talked about, say, well, I've already been through those treatments and it didn't solve my problem. I'd like to go to somebody that offers me an alternative.
Yes.
It may not be paid for by your company.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So we have to say to I think we have to do things such as call up the insurance company and say, if you don't cover these things, I'm going to switch companies.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. We have to, in other words, it's the marketplace that drives it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good.
Say to your veterinarian, if you're not going to offer, homeopathy, Chinese medicine, chiropractic, whatever it is, if you're not going to offer that to me, I'm going to go to somebody else.
Yeah.
That's really has impact.
I guess it would, yeah.
It really does, yeah.
I like that. I like that approach. Put them on the spot. Let's encourage our wonderful veterinarians, who I know got into practice because they wanted to help animals heal and be well, and then what do they're stuck in practices where they're watching animals get more and more and more sick, you know, just like you did. And so many of them don't know that there are other options or alternatives. So maybe we, animal parents, can help encourage them to go in this direction. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So what would you like our listeners to do next? So how can we get started doing that? I mean, so if we go to our vet and say, I just don't have time or I'm not interested in that, and then, so I think your website, you have a referral list of veterinarians?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, I started this course in 1992 for veterinarians.
Okay.
It's a year-long course in training in homeopathy, because I speak about homeopathy because, of course, that's what I know and that's what I do. So
right.
There are other systems out there, of course, we've touched on briefly. But I'll say, as far as homeopathy is concerned, that I have had this course, and so every year I have a group of veterinarians who have gone through the training program. I have, at this point, close to 500, as you mentioned in the introduction.
Yeah.
Out of that 500, I don't know how many there are there, maybe 150 or so, I'm guessing, that are on my website that want to be listed as a referral. In other words, that they're interested in having people contact them for homeopathic care.
Okay.
Not all of them want to, for whatever reason. Some veterinarians are busy enough, or they just don't want to deal with anybody that's from a distance because, they find it awkward.
Right.
But anyway, the website only has that limited number. It doesn't have everybody, but it has a pretty good list organized by state and also Canadian province of veterinarians that are willing to work with you as for homeopathic care. So certainly that's a wonderful resource.
Perfect.
There also is on my website there is a on the first page, I think it's maybe it's on the other pages. On the first page there, on the right side, if I remember right, there's a picture there of a veterinarian looking at a tiger through a cage.
Yes.
And you can go on that link to. There's a group of I set up a forum where people could go ask questions of these homeopathic veterinarians, and if you wish to, you can become a client of theirs.
Oh, cool.
And so it's a group of about 6 of them that are willing to do that.
Okay.
And they will help you, even if you're not able to come in because you live, in the local area.
Okay.
They can still consult with you and help you.
Oh, that's awesome.
When there are problems, consult with your animals. So
okay.
Those are really good resources, both of those. Perfect.
And everybody, again, your website is drpitcairn.com, drpitcairn.com. And I know that there's also a description of your book, a link for purchasing it. And, of course, that's also on Amazon and everywhere else. Thank you for that.
Sure.
And then I think you have some other resources there. You have articles?
I've only put 2 up right now.
Okay.
They're both about vaccines. If people are interested, there are talks I gave in 1993 on the vaccination question. There's two of them. One of them is about understanding the problems with vaccines, what kind of illnesses have occurred. And the other one is about the alternative as far as homeopathic use instead. So
perfect.
they might be in it. You can download them or you can view them there. I have other talks I've given that I'll put up someday, but that's all I have right now.
Perfect. I love
and there's
that.
also, going back to the books, there's also some other books I've put up that are books about homeopathy, so on, that people might be interested in wanting to read, so they can links to Amazon.
Yes, that's really important. And by the way, for your program, is that only for licensed veterinarians, or can anyone?
It's for veterinarians, and also we have a couple of positions for veterinary technicians that are working with vets. Be trained as homeopathic assistants. But primarily, yes, it's for it's a veterinary program. It's accredited by the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy.
Cool.
And they can go through the program, and then they can go through an accreditation process. So it's really organized for that. I sometimes put on webinars for the general public, but I would put that on my website if there was one scheduled.
Okay. Yes. So do you have a newsletter or anything else that we can get on so we get the announcement?
I don't have a newsletter at this time. No.
So we'll just have to keep our eye out and hopefully, tell you what, next time you want to do that, let me know, and I'll help to get the word out. And I would love to do that course myself. So thank you so much. All right. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with, or that we haven't mentioned yet that you feel is important?
Oh gosh, there's so many topics.
I just opened the door on that one, didn't I? How much more time do we have? Well, we may tell you what. We may have to come back and do some more of that another time.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think that the main thing I hope to communicate. I hope it was clear enough to people to understand when they are looking for a different approach to treatment. To understand that it really is different, and it's not just different in method, like putting a needle in or giving a different kind of pill, but it's really different philosophically.
Yes.
That's I think the part that's often missed, that it really is a different approach entirely, and it isn't appropriate to try to do everything at once. That's what I find. That's the saddest thing to me, is if somebody has an animal that's seriously ill with something, say, a cancerous tumor or some other serious, what seems to be a really serious problem. And they become frightened. And out of fear, they try to do everything they possibly can, every possible therapy, all of which more or less cancels itself out. Those are the cases, those are the situations where I see very little progress.
Yeah.
So they have to really conquer their fear. They have to be willing to say, act intelligently and say, this is the approach I'm going to use, and I'm going to commit myself to it. And not out of fear try to do everything, pull everything in, which just counteracts each other.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, and I'm glad you said that. Yeah. I think that is one of our underlying issues, is that we get afraid. We have a serious issue. We don't know what to do, so we throw everything but the kitchen sink at it, and hope it goes away. And like you just said, it all cancels each other out. The body can't deal with all of that.
Yes.
And plus, we are now all unstable and weak because we're all scared to death.
That's it. Yeah.
So that doesn't help anything either.
It's a challenge. See, that's the part that is more the responsibility of the person bringing the animal to the veterinarian, isn't it? It's like it's because everybody, when their animal's sick, to some degree they are afraid.
Yes.
Understandably. But fear never serves in any way whatsoever.
No.
It never does any good. It never helps us to make decisions. It never helps us to come up with a solution.
Right.
All it does is make us do things that are mistakes and act inappropriately.
Yes.
So that's the responsibility, part of the responsibility that one has to, ideally, one has to acknowledge and face is, yes, it's possible the animal may not recover. Yes, it's possible it may die. Yeah. But I can't let fear drive me.
Right.
That's the mistake,
Right.
And so it's a hard one, but it's also, it's a great lesson, isn't it? It's one of the lessons that we can get from that relationship.
Yes.
Is learn not to be afraid.
Right. A lot of vets refer to me, and of course I get my clients from all over the world, but this is one of the reasons, is because when the animal's parent, the caretaker, is in great distress, they're not balanced, they're not in their right mind, they're really struggling with these issues, then that's where my work comes in so beautifully, because it really helps them calm themselves, reconnect with their animal, and get back in touch with what's most important, and then we go from there. And at that point, in that space, then we have a better chance of healing, and not just the animal healing, but the person also.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Dr. Pitcairn, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well, you're quite welcome.
Yeah, and thanks for all you're doing. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, my head is spinning. I've got a lot to think about, and really looking forward to what's next. So, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So I think that's it.
Okay.
We will, I guess, talk to you later. I'd love to continue the conversation as we can. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more information or to listen to other podcasts, go to valhart.com/blog. And if you're someone who values a non-invasive, holistic solution to resolving problems with your dogs, cats, and horses, and you want better behaved, healthier, and happier animals, just go to my website at valhart.com to apply for a complimentary Happy Animal Assessment session. And be sure and remember to look for my CDs on iTunes. Learning how to talk with animals is fun and will change your life. So while you're there at my site, get my free Quick Start Animal Talk course and check out the world's first complete Animal Communication Made Easy system. May the love of animals bless you, teach you, inspire you, heal you, and reconnect you to the circle of life.